Welcome to the Gamers Tavern. This episode went a little bit long because we've got two amazing guests to talk about an amazing topic. Adam Jury and Michael Surbrook join us to talk about Cyberpunk. So I won't get too long-winded here, but I do have to announce the winner of the Gamers Tavern Max Sit Me contest. As you're probably aware, the winner of this contest gets a brand new iPod Shuffle loaded with episodes of the Gamers Tavern. If I can figure out how to get them on there without assigning it to an iTunes account. Apple products are a little finicky, but it's the best on the market, and our winner gets one. Plus, they also get a copy of Accursed, the dark fantasy campaign setting for Savage Worlds, signed by the designer Ross Watson, courtesy of Melior Via. They also get a copy of Tephra, the fantasy steampunk game signed by the designer, courtesy of Cracked Monocle. A copy of Dementalism, a game of ingenious ingeniousness, the card-matching game set in the surreal world of lowlife, signed by Andy Hopp, courtesy of Mother Oath Creations. A copy of Better Angels, a demonic supervillain game, signed by Shane Ivey, courtesy of Arc Dream Publishing. And finally, a free admission with the purchase of one adult admission to Con on the Cob in Hudson, Ohio this October, courtesy of Con on the Cob. And the winner of this amazing prize package is Lauren Lance from Clearwater, Florida. On behalf of myself and Ross, I'd like to thank everyone who entered the contest and especially thank our sponsors who made this contest possible. If you didn't win, don't worry, we've got another one in the works very, very soon. But until then, let's go ahead and get started with the discussion of one of my favorite genres, cyberpunk and transhumanism. So sit back, grab a drink from the bar, and join us at the table in the corner, and we'll be right back after this word from our sponsor. Did you think the Spirit Store was only open during Halloween? Well, I've got some news for you. The perfect place for that hard-to-find accessory for your newest cosplay, unique home decor for your LARP, that awesome prop for your D&D game, they've got it all. Whether you're on a budget or you're looking for the highest quality product you can find, Spirit has what you need. Just go to the show notes or to gamerstavern.org and click on the affiliate link to support the show and find that perfect item now.
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Gamers Tavern podcast. This is your host, Ross Watson.
And I'm Daryl Mott Jr.
And tonight we have two great guests with us. We have Adam Jury.
Good evening, everyone.
And Mike Surbrook.
Good evening, everyone.
Wow, those guys sound eerily alike, don't they? We invited these two gentlemen to join us tonight because we have a really great topic. Tonight we're going to talk about cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk. I guess post-human maybe might be a better term for that. RPGs, which of course near and dear to both Daryl and myself, and these two gentlemen as well. But before we get into the main topic, we're going to do what we always do here on the Gamers Tavern, which is we're going to give our guests a chance to introduce themselves and tell the listeners a little bit about who they are and where they might be known from in the gaming industry. We like to call this your gaming character sheet. So why don't we let Mike Surbrook go first. Mike, what is your gamer character sheet like?
Wow. Well, it goes.
Well, it's probably a champion's.
Yes,
character,
it is.
Right?
It's a champion. It's definitely a champion's character sheet. And it was first created in about 1984 because I disregarded all my D&D character sheets from before that. And it probably has some really good knowledge skills with about the hero system and champions and designing characters, and with a lot of writing, a little bit of drawing, and some web development.
Yeah, where does people in the gaming industry, where do they know you from?
They would know me from Hero Games and primarily in Blackworm Games. I've done projects for both companies. And some may also recognize my name for a few products that I worked on with Fantasy Flight games in Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader.
That's right. Okay, awesome. If they want to see, stuff related to you on the interwebs, where would they go to find that?
Easiest thing to do, as my ex-brother-in-law would say, I have some of the greatest geek cred in the world. You put my last name into Google, and I feel lucky, and you go to my website.
And that's SURBROOK,
exactly.
Mike Surbrook. Okay. And that'll take you to Surbrook Stuff, and that is a site you have maintained for how long?
Estimate 1996 or 97. Probably one of the longest running sites in gaming and possibly on the web. It is dedicated to the hero system and is often the first stop for hero gamers to find character sheets for just about anything.
So 27 plus years you've been maintaining that site. That's pretty impressive.
No. 17. I think you mean, right? 17?
Math.
I'm not that old.
Math is hard. Math is hard.
Math is hard.
So 17 years. All right, 17
Yes.
years. Fair enough. That's still a long time.
Yes.
That's probably almost a whole voting person. So good job on
Thank
that.
you.
All right, Mr. Adam Jury. He has a magnificent head of hair, I must say. Mr. Jury, can you tell our listeners what your gaming character sheet is like?
Well, my gaming character sheet is probably something like 8th level graphic designer, 6th level publisher. I'm currently I'm the founder and co-owner of Posthuman Studios. We publish Eclipse Phase and the card game Shinobi Clans. And other relevant stuff I've done, I worked a ton on classic Battletech, the relaunch of that about 8 years ago, and Shadowrun, a little bit on 3rd edition, bunch on 4th edition and the 20th anniversary edition. And way back when, I started out working for Guardians of Order, working mostly on the Big Eyes Smallmouth line and their licensed anime stuff.
And I know Adam primarily as a Shadowrun fan from back in the day, looking at Dump Shock and looking at various Shadowrun website things. You'd usually see a couple of names pop up almost all the time, and that would be Mike Mulvihill, and then Adam Jury would be right behind him.
That puts me in some good company.
Yeah, so absolutely, Adam is extremely well associated with Cyberpunk and post-human stuff. Adam, if they want to find out more about you and your awesome head of hair, where do they go to find this on the interwebs?
I'm lucky because I'm highly Googleable. My name, Adam Jury. I have adamjury.com, and I'm not the dentist from Seattle. Which kind of cracks me up. There's a dentist named Adam Jury from Redmond, Washington, which it was just a coincidence that I love.
I believe this is actually you setting up your fake identity for when the apocalypse occurs, and then you can just fade into the woodwork, and everyone will be looking for the publisher, but not the dentist.
Hide out in the Barrens.
As long as I don't have to be a dentist, because that seems like a pretty awful job.
That would be an awesome street name. The dentist.
The dentist.
Which, if you guys don't know, the first episode's already gone live on the site as we're recording this. We're probably on the 3rd or 4th at this point, but we started a Shadowrun 4th edition actual play podcast.
Oh, awesome.
Recently called Game Table. So if our listeners haven't heard that yet, definitely check it out. And if our guests have free time, feel free to check that out as well.
So now that we've introduced our two guests, we're going to go into our next thing, which is now 3 or 4 episodes old, I believe. We're going to ask you guys for a special thing that we've been asking our guests to give us something that nobody else has. And what we're going to ask you is we're going to ask you for the most memorable die roll in a role playing game that you can remember. So let's start with Mike Surbrook. Mike, can give us the most memorable single die roll that you can think of off the top of your head.
My most recent one had to be the double ones from Genghis Khan, in which my opium addict character managed to sleep through the entire fight.
Wow.
That was a notice check that went nowhere. I was able to turn it around, though, because one of my fellow PCs was trapped somewhere, and I said, well, can I meet her in my opium-addled dreams? And the GM said, yes. And
that's a good GM right
yes.
there. I want to point that out. Yeah, that's a really good story. And I was also at Genghis Khan, not in that particular game, but we're going to talk about that more in a minute. Adam, what's your most memorable recent, or it doesn't have to be recent, what's your most memorable role from an RPG game?
About 10 years ago, I was playing in a Star Wars game using one of the WotC D20 versions. I had missed the first session of the game, and so my character ended up being like a Wookiee truck driver. That the other characters had needed to kidnap him to take his truck essentially in the first session, and so we rolled him into my character, and after a little while he was the only non-Jedi in the campaign, and as everyone who's played Star Wars knows, that's really imbalanced. So we went through a series of adventures where he became a Jedi, mostly for the sake of making sure that I could have fun in the campaign. But he stuck to using the Wookiee bowcaster as his primary weapon, out of kind of like loyalty. My roles in the campaign were uniformly normal, except whenever I used the bowcaster, I could just not do anything useful with it. but I stuck to it because it seemed appropriate for the character. And then in one really big boss fight, everyone had kind of had their turn, and nobody had really done any damage to the boss. And then it was, my priority came up, and I'm like, okay, so I take out the bowcaster and I take careful aim, and everyone's kind of joking, like, and you're gonna miss, right? And then I rolled the natural 20, and we won.
Nice.
And we won, and it was perfectly timed. It was. You sometimes, the randomness of a role-playing game does not match the drama of what would happen if you were just telling the story, and in this case, it totally did. So that was amazing.
Awesome. Hey, that is a really good timing on that roll. Okay, so last thing before we jump into the subject, we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately. And I'm going to start with Daryl, because I think that Mike and I are going to have some very similar things to say. So, Daryl, what have you been playing lately?
Well, I've been helping out a friend of mine who is trying to start out a Skype game of his own. He's really been wanting to play 2nd edition AD&D, so that's what I'm trying to help him work out the logistics of that and work on his character. He's trying to figure out how to be a cleric thief in 2nd AD&D.
That's a tough challenge.
Yeah. So I'm trying to help him out with that and with explaining it away in the world they're in as why he's doing that. So that's a little bit of a challenge. And, of course, I've been playing Shadowrun 4th Edition. We had a game where, unfortunately, Ross wasn't able to join us, but I'm sure he's going to more than make up for it in his gaming when he talks about what games he's been playing, because he had to miss out because he was at Genghis Khan.
Yeah, actually, I'm totally looking forward to Friday when we will resume our Shadowrun actual play, because we need to get more crazy, tiny stereotype into that game. All right. So Adam, if you're curious, I will absolutely tell you all about this character after the show, because he's kind of
sure
crazy.
Thing.
All right. So, Michael, why don't you tell us about what you've been playing lately?
Well, at Genghis Khan, I played some Hero System, and this meant that I was a superhero, a luchador, and an alchemist in 3 different games. I also played a lot of Savage Worlds, because we don't play it around here, and I like it. I want to get a little bit more of a feel for it. So I was lucky enough to be a Walking Dead man, a Goblin adept, a drug-addled sorceress, and a couple other characters. Here at home, when I'm not at a con, I'm actually in 3 different gaming groups, and right now we're once again playing Hero System, where I play a Wuxi warrior in ancient China, because we tried and honestly gave up on Legends of the Wu Lin. I'm also playing in a campaign that Ross has never heard of called Shadows Angelus, which uses the Hero System.
The game that will not die. 9 years old and counting.
On Sundays, we stopped playing Shadowrun for various reasons, and I'm looking to return to our Fantasy Craft campaign. And there's some talk about our new player running some Call of Cthulhu one-shots, because he really enjoys COC. And also, the final thing that I'm involved in, which is I'm waiting to get back into, is we play Ironclaw.
Oh, super cool. I'm going to go next, just because I think Adam's probably got some really cool things to say, and I don't want to miss out on them. And Michael and I were both at Genghis Khan this last weekend. Like he says, we played a lot of Hero and Savage Worlds. I got to run Accursed there for a group, and another guy named David Weiss also ran Accursed, so we had 2 games of Accursed going on, which is great. Accursed, of course, is my Savage World setting where Hellboy meets Solomon Kane. And the 2 most memorable games, I'm just going to briefly skim over them, both actually had Michael in them, so that's something to think about. The first most memorable game was the Widening Gyre, which is a game run by my friend Bill Keys. It's steampunk. It's almost like a steampunk version of Shadowrun, because there's magic and stuff involved. And it was so cool. I mean, I just don't know how to say it. There's a magical moment where some groups will just get together and everybody is immediately immersed in character, and the story almost doesn't even matter. You're just having so much fun role-playing with each other. And we had that game. I mean, we did things. We fought ninja warriors on top of an airship. We banished a demon. I invented a heavy metal electric guitar 200 years too early. It was really fun. I mean, there's not much else I can say except it was just incredibly fun and one of those you'll hardly ever forget type games. And the second game was Champions, which was run by Robert Dorff, who is an extremely talented game master. and he was running a game about the luchadors. This is where Mike was playing the Blue Demon, and I was playing El Santo. And Blue Demon, El Santo, and the rest of the Champions of Justice had to find a way to defeat a 90-foot-tall vampire in the middle of Mexico City. And, of course, the only way to do that is to combine all the luchadors together into Mega Lucha. It was absolutely fantastic.
Stop laughing. It was awesome.
We had two people.
No, I'm laughing because it sounds awesome. And this also was not in Ross's blog about the Genghis Khan.
No, well, briefly it was, but
well, the game, but not the 90-foot tall luchador wasn't.
There were two people who'd never played Champions before who joined us, and it's always fun to see people who've never tried something get into it and learn it and grasp it, and you can just see their little lights flick on like, aha, I get it. And these two people totally did. And honestly, playing luchadors is not real easy to grasp for a lot of people. Like I said, it was really exciting just to see them, jump in and both feet and were instantly part of it. So yeah, Genghis Khan, fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it. Go to Colorado and go to Genghis Khan if you can, just because it's the best gaming con in the world. All right, Mr. Jury, what have you been playing lately?
First, I just want to say, the idea of a whole bunch of luchadors combining into Mega Luchador, it's amazing. And I have this picture of the combining sequence, and as they combine, all of their outfits and their masks and capes and whatnot begin to mesh to be the right colors, so that when Mega Luchador is together, it looks perfect, just like the giant size action figure. That sounds pretty sweet.
It was absolutely brilliant. We all got our own chance to individually sort of drive the Mega Lucha, and it was great.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, I'm not role playing lately. The group of people that I would be playing with, we've fallen victim to the real life adult thing. One of us works like a 10-day on, 10-day off shift thing and is rarely around, so scheduling has been really difficult. So a lot of my gaming lately has been a little more casual, playing card games with my friends, and I still play a fair amount of Magic the Gathering, sort of semi-competitively.
Cool.
6 buddies and I, 3 weeks ago, or late January, we all got in a van and we drove 14 hours to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, to play in the Grand Prix event, because there's only 3 or 4 Grand Prix in Canada every year.
Sweet.
So that's been good times. It's different from role playing, but it's still, I think gaming is gaming.
It's still gaming, man.
Yeah, I don't, I don't subscribe to the whole there's one type of gaming that's better than the other or whatnot. And I'm kind of competitive, so playing like a competitive game to me is a lot more interesting most of the time than just sitting around and playing a game just for fun. To me, the fun is in the competing and in the getting better at things.
I think you'd agree there's many different types of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the way I play a card game is a lot different from the way I look at a role-playing game and play a role-playing game. Those are two distinct types of fun that I enjoy for very different reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm the same way with miniature gaming. I'm a very competitive guy when I play miniature gaming, but yeah, it's a different kind of fun. And then you're right, it totally counts. I'm really super thrilled that you're involved in Magic. That's something I've never really been able to grasp what's so compelling about it, but I know it is super compelling.
I am 10 years clean. Magic, so.
I
almost had a relapse about 2 years ago, but I pulled through.
Oh, I mean, the stuff that's been coming out lately has been really good in theme-wise and everything. So that's kind of
the current block's Greek myth, isn't it?
Yeah, the current Theros block is kind of based on mostly Greek myth and with some other stuff pulled into it. And 2 years ago, there was a series of sets that were horror trope based. So vampires, zombies.
That was the Ravina, wasn't it?
No, it was Innistrad and Dark Ascension.
Oh, yeah, that's
and they
the
were the cards in terms of playing them and drafting them. It was really well done, but the theme was also very, very relatable, and that block got a lot of people kind of hooked back in.
I'm just going to do a quick shout out to my good friend James Hada, who is at WotC, hard at work developing more Magic the Gathering stuff. James and I worked together back at Fantasy Flight Games, and actually I was James's first introduction to role-playing games through the magic and wonder of the White Wolf Street Fighter, the role-playing game.
Oh, I remember that.
I own that.
Oh man, Street Fighter is. I mean, it looks like something. It's one of those games you're like, I don't understand how to play this or how it would be fun, and then you play it with someone, and you're like, oh my god, this is amazing. It's great.
On paper, this should not work. Somehow
yeah, it's like
it
an
does.
oddball. It's a pretty oddball RPG, but I love it. So there you go. All right. Well, now we've talked about all the things we've been playing, so we're going to jump right in with both feet, and we're going to enter the world of cyberpunk and post-human or post-cyberpunk role-playing. And I think we better start out with talking about what those terms mean. I'm going to ask Mike Surbrook. Mike, can you define for me what cyberpunk means?
To me?
Yeah, for role-playing.
For role-playing?
Specifically. Yeah.
I think cyberpunk to me is nested in the 80s. Cyberpunk role-playing. A lot of chrome, a lot of wires, a lot of mirror shades, tall buildings, rain, submachine guns, long coats, fast cars. Maybe it's because I first saw Shadowrun back in the 80s, Blade Runner, and all that. And also things like Bubblegum Crisis and Appleseed. And a lot of the Japanese anime at the time, I think, influenced
Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell comes a little later. But yeah, a lot of that, the anime and the manga coming out of Japan really seemed to illustrate what I wanted my cyberpunk to look like.
So kind of a combination of the style and attitude of the 80s plus a lot of cyber technology and high technology, as long as it's sort of outside the human body kind of a thing.
Yeah, something to that effect.
Okay. All right, well, that's a pretty good definition, I would say. Adam Jury. Can you define for me?
That was a really fine definition by itself.
Adam Jury, can you tell us what we should be defining our term as for the post-human or post-cyberpunk RPG style?
So when you're going to post-cyberpunk, you are looking at something that was started evolving and being created a little bit after cyberpunk. And one of the things about cyberpunk is a lot of it is rooted in the fears that we had in the 80s. That America was afraid that Japan was going to become all-powerful and take over, that sort of thing. Post-cyberpunk and post-human stuff is like a little more, our concerns are a little more modern in what they're rooted in. So we are afraid of things like a lack of network neutrality, and oppressive governments from both sides of the political spectrum. And we're also getting a little bit older, so we are getting concerned about our own mortality, our natural mortality. But it's a little less chromed up in general. It's a little less style over substance, I think, than traditional cyberpunk. In both in like the way technology has evolved to be a little more derived from our current day technology. I mean, you can only look at like our modern day cell phone compared to the pocket secretary in the first edition of Shadowrun, which was described as being relatively huge.
Well, is it 2 kilo or something like that?
It's like something that Zach Morris would be carrying around high school. But
and don't forget, in Cyberpunk 2020, your cell phone was what, $300-$400? Nowadays, you can get them for free.
Right, you get them for free as long as you consent to being, tracked by the government and your cell phone company, anyone they sell your information to. But yes, in essence, cyberpunk quickly, the technology in most cases, the day-to-day technology, got very eclipsed by real-world technology. Whereas other stuff that cyberpunk has posited, like, cybernetic eyes and limbs and whatnot, those are still evolving. And
we're in prototype stages right now. They have created cochlear implants that have allowed deaf people to hear. About last week, I think they had the first artificial limb that's controlled by the brain. Someone created a hand that basically a cyber hand. Someone had their hand amputated, gave them a hand that they can, with their mind, not using any muscle control or anything, move the digits on it.
Well, I like what Adam had to say about it being the sort of reflection of our fears, of our culture's kind of zeitgeist of the things that we are afraid of or don't want to see. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And I think Eclipse Phase, for example, which is Adam Jury's probably biggest claim to fame right now, does a really good job of addressing that. Even if you look at on the back cover of Eclipse Phase, it kind of briefly runs down what it's about. And one of the things I always loved about that was it says death is a disease, cure it.
Yeah, it's big on the transhumanism, which is basically taking a lot of the ideas from Cyberpunk that they had, where, like, how much of your soul do you keep when you start replacing your body parts with chrome or everything else? Transhumanists seem to be more along the lines of the soul, and it's kind of an examination of, is the soul part of the body? So if you're completely uploading your brain to a computer server or something like that and getting 3D printed bodies, is it still you? And that's kind of the thing that some of the fiction addresses. I don't know if Adam wants to go in a little bit more detail on that and how it's addressed in his game. But
no, I mean that's a pretty good summation, and that is obviously in most post-cyberpunk, post-human works. That's a core question: is like, what is a human being, and are you still a human being if you are radically modified, or do you become something else? And we use the term post-human to describe, in the future, the average human who is modified to the point of being above a normal human, to the point where, like, in Eclipse Phase, there are few people who are not modified in some way, because that's just the standard.
Although I would argue actually that the whole, like, what is human and how far can we go and still be human? That's a trope that is true in post-human and post-cyberpunk, but it's also a really big one in cyberpunk as well. I think that's a trope that is shared equally between those two as a storyline, as something to think about.
It's on the back cover of Kaze 5. That's actually the question that I asked when I wrote that copy.
Right.
And it's one of those things that the big divide for me when it comes, at least especially in fiction, between cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk seems to be the outlook of it. Cyberpunk, almost every single good cyberpunk novel and most of the good games and everything like that, very defeatist.
Bleak.
Exactly. Bleak.
Very
dark.
bleak.
Almost all of them end in tragedy, or at the very best, a bittersweet ending. You can name off pretty much all of them except for... I think you start getting the divide in novels when you get Snow Crash. 'Cause that one was almost a parody of Cyberpunk in a way.
It's still a little bleak.
It is. It's not a fun world.
Except that Snow Crash is connected to a somewhat more bleaker future, because Snow Crash is part of the universe that also contains the Diamond Age.
See, I haven't read that one yet.
Oh, it's
Snow Crash on its own is still a little bleak, but it's not. It's probably a little more lighthearted than
it paints a bleak world, but it's not nearly as dark and noirish.
The presentation in Snow Crash is not as dark as the world actually is. I think.
I'd agree with that.
And and a lot of that has to do with the tone, and that's what a lot of post-cyberpunk has. Is even though you're still in the crapsack world, it's not the dark, rainy city streets and everything's grimy and everything. A lot of it's a little bit brighter. I always point to, for the quintessential post-cyberpunk story, is Transmetropolitan, the comic book Warren Ellis wrote. Do you guys know that one at all?
I know Spider Jerusalem.
That's the one.
Haven't followed that one particularly.
That's what I know.
Yeah, I haven't read that one in a long time.
It is an amazing 60 issue. It's basically Hunter S. Thompson in a post-cyberpunk world, where everything's bright and shiny on the surface, but the second you even try to look past it, you start to see all the just shit everywhere and how horrible and corrupt and evil the world is. And then you've got this basically Hunter S. Thompson reporting on it. So it's a really good series. So that's to me is quintessential post-cyberpunk. It's
all right.
It's a little bit lighter in tone, but it still has a lot of the same tropes and it's a lot more self-aware in a lot of ways. Where it's
something that was really unique about Cyberpunk, as opposed to post-Cyberpunk, is that it was like heavily embraced as a style, and I think a lot of this comes from Blade Runner. It was heavily embraced as a style for storytelling, especially visual storytelling, in other countries. And specifically, I'm going to go with Japan and anime here. Anime was hugely influenced by Blade Runner and Cyberpunk.
I want a neon umbrella
movement. Well, it's not just that. There are some works of anime that I would say are almost classics of that particular genre because of how well they did it. And Mike has brought up quite a few of them, Bubblegum Crisis and Ghost in the Shell and whatnot. Possibly the one I always go back to is Megazone 23. because of its although it doesn't do cyberpunk in terms of the body modification and the questions about humanity, what it does touch on is that social commentary of cyberpunk, which was that the subcultures were where the last freedom in humanity, the last real freedom of human expression was, and that authoritarianism was sort of going to be, and fascism to an extent, were going to be like the next, the inevitable next step of large political and economic groups.
Yeah, Big Brother watching has always been a theme of cyberpunk.
Yeah, but I think even more than that, I would also say that the idea that human freedom and creativity lies with the subcultures.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you guys disagree with me on that one, or
no,
am I out of left
agree.
field? Okay. I didn't mean to shut everybody up. I was just like, this is something I think about.
No, I'm sort of pondering your words and trying to think about how that applies to my setting, and I think in some ways. One of the things that's been kind of emphasized, at least in the play-by-mail when we did that, was the zero zone, the subculture of the lawless zone is where you really could be free and be a free thinker, because elsewhere it was all, corporations making sure you were a good corporate employee, or the government having cameras everywhere to make sure you didn't act up. And so I see what you're saying. I think that actually goes back to the original definition of cyberpunk, which was, I just completely forgot his name. The guy that wrote Neuromancer.
Gibson.
William Gibson.
Yeah, seeing the kids on skateboards skating in the area where it said no skating, and that was his definition of cyberpunk. The subculture was modifying the world to what they wanted, and that's sort of what he felt was the idea behind it. It was sort of rebelling against the man, so to speak, but doing it in more creative ways.
Mr. Jury, when we're talking about social commentary, how would you apply that to the post-cyberpunk or post-human style?
I mean, I think that's probably relatively similar. Although, as you get into post-cyberpunk sort of stuff, like the snubbing your nose at authority gets more audacious and more out there, because you just have to make a bigger fuss for people to notice it. And so the idea that people will always be existing in a places where they are not supposed to, whether those people are skateboarding and somewhere where there's signs posted "Do not skateboard." But if you really want to get attention, you have to do a lot more than that to have anyone pay attention to you, whether that is like the government that coming in to crack down on you, or other people noticing that you are protesting or making some sort of statement. Essentially, because of the way social media will have evolved, you just have to make that much more noise, because there's that much more information flowing.
And would you also say that post-human and post-cyberpunk style is that also very bleak, or does that change some of that outlook and tone?
That's kind of a perpetual discussion. I will see people say that, like, oh my gosh, like, Eclipse Phase is really, really dystopian and really horrible, and who would want to live there? And that's true in a lot of cases. But I mean, I do think there's more room for hope.
Yeah, I feel that too.
Partially because of like the accelerated technology levels. I mean, there's more room for hope if you can live for 500 years as opposed to 100, because you have that much more of a chance to break free and make a difference.
Or 30 plus if you're an orc.
Right.
In Shadowrun.
The short end of the stick there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think in general, like, post-cyberpunk stuff is seen as a little more hopeful in some ways, but could be much worse. I mean, if you are, we call them an indenture, and that they're basically character or person who is, they're in debt to somebody, and so they may be forced to, like, manually mine rocks on an asteroid for 30 years. Like, that's pretty awful. And you could extend that out, like, well, what if they end up being a permanent indenture? What if they do that for their entire life? And because they are in some sort of biological morph, they're not going to physically die, and their brain's, good forever, essentially. So there's obviously some pretty horrible things that can go on with, perpetual life as well, and the other high technologies.
Well, I would say, I mean, let's take that back a little step and say, like, what is some of the things we like about the genres of cyberpunk, post-cyberpunk, post-human? What are some things we like about them with regards to technology? What is the thing that really drives you to it from a technological standpoint? Daryl?
I have in my hand right now a Samsung Galaxy S4. This device is about 1/4 of an inch thick, 3 inches wide, 3 inches wide, and about 4 or 5 inches long. With this device, I have access to more information than anyone in the entire history of mankind has ever had access to at any point in time.
As long as you got bars, right?
Yep, between audio, video, text, I have anything that has been written that is not copyrighted is in Project Gutenberg. YouTube is full of instructional videos and everything else. I can watch documentaries on Netflix from this phone. There's an app that makes fart noises.
Why am I not surprised you own that one?
I do not, actually. I don't. That's my point is we're getting to the point where we're living in this world that I have loved. I've always been a big fan of technology. My first computer was a Tandy Color Computer 2. Always been in love with technology, and just the idea of being able to take a cable, plug it into my brain, and just exist online is something that's just awesome, and it's something that we're slowly moving towards in terms of everyone has their little pocket computer with them all the time, and they're constantly talking to people from all over the world. Okay. And that just blows my mind because that's something we were just fantasizing about in Cyberpunk, and it's something that I've always loved about it. It's that fascination with technology and the kind of exploration of what it means when technology becomes omnipresent like that.
What about you, Michael? What about you in technology and cyberpunk or post-cyberpunk? What is that? What about it draws you to it?
I think it's sort of the same thing. I think what fascinated me with the cyberpunk settings that I was interested in was a mixture of the technology, both the computer technology, the internal cyberware, and the external technology. Really, I think Blade Runner with the flying cars, the spinners, the organic robots, the giant airships, the power armor from Bubblegum Crisis, the crazy weaponry that shows up in some of the things. Just, I think all of it. Unfortunately, Daryl kind of said it best, too. I mean, my opinion is we do live in a cyberpunk world right now. What we're doing right now, this phone call, the way we're doing it, the way we're recording it, dropping lines like, yeah, I've got Dropbox. We can all communicate with a shared file system on the internet and dump files to each other. I mean, this is actually beyond even what Gibson was writing about in Neuromancer. This is stuff that they couldn't even think of. And we just treat it every day and look at it and don't even worry about it. And it's fascinating to see that we have this sort of, we have the matrix, we have the web, the internet, whatever you want to call it, all around us. And, every day things get faster, clearer, bigger, stronger, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing this world that we only fantasized about when you picked up the first volume of Shadowrun, and they talked about Dex and smart gun links and Cyberrise, and it's coming real as I see it, and that's what I find amazing.
What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's kind of already said it. I mean, we looked at these, like, when we started reading cyberpunk books and other science fiction books, they were science fiction, and now they're science fact, or in some cases science history. Like I said, our cell phones are better than a Shadowrun's 2050 pocket secretary was described. I mean, all of that technology stuff is amazing, and we all essentially depend on it on a day-to-day basis. In a way that in some ways is even more casual than it was portrayed in, some early cyberpunk fiction and whatnot, where it was more separated between haves and have-nots. And obviously, I mean, there's still a huge class divide in the modern world, but you look at almost anybody when you're walking down the street and they have access to, a cell phone, a 3G or a 4G connection, and, like I said, like all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips. And there's that meme that goes around, like, that, if you told someone, 50 or 100 years ago, if we had all this, they would have been shocked. And then, of course, you tell them that we mostly use it to look at pictures of cats.
He stole my joke.
And
totally true.
And I have to wonder too, like, hopefully in cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk fiction, hopefully people are doing things more important than looking at cats. with their lives. And I hope that most of us in our real lives are also doing that too. Not that I mean like looking at some cats isn't great sometimes, but we can't let technology now and in the future become a distraction from humanity, whatever humanity becomes.
Well said.
I actually, it's your comment also. A friend of mine related an interesting story talking about how casually we work with technology, and he was at a conference, I think a Java conference, and William Shatner was there, and somebody asked him, how long did it take you before you realized the significance of your flip open cell phone? And he actually admitted, it was sometime within the past, I guess from this point, 8 years, that he takes his cell phone out and he flips it open to talk into it, and he just stared at it. All of a sudden it just dawned on him that he was holding a Star Trek communicator. And it just never realized it because it treated it so casually and accepted it. This is my cell phone. This is a great case of life imitating art, but it's also a case of how things, we just accept it and we work with it, and we don't. There's no future shock that people feared about because it's kind of come a little bit more gradually. Well,
for me, I'm going to say like what really attracted me to cyberpunk, and maybe to a slightly lesser extent, post-cyberpunk, post-human technology, is twofold. The first thing was I always liked how it gave me sort of a way to parse, kind of like a framework to understand things that in other media would basically be seen as magic or superhero powers. Like, if in a fantasy novel, the wizard waves his wand and the door opens, or he waves his wand and the guards come under his control. Well, in Shadowrun, or other cyberpunk games, they would tell you, well, the Decker hacks into their communications and there's an electronic door control, which they can then activate. And it was like, okay, so yeah, it's basically magic, it's basically superpowers, but I'm getting a way to relate to that through technology, through things that I do understand in my own physical life, which I thought was great. Like, the idea of like some guy being a supernaturally good shot, where he can just, shoot anything at any distance. And then, you look at smart links, or you look at the idea that there's a reticle on my eye that I can just, wherever I shoot, I can see that. And that, again, I'm like, oh, all right. So that takes that formerly supernatural thing and turns it into something more, much more real to me, even though it isn't, real, obviously, but something more relatable. And the second reason, the second thing about that type of technology that drew me in was not only was it deep and highly detailed, not only was it, a cool way to talk about magic or superpowers, it was also something that you could see on the horizon. Like, I've been playing these games since the 80s, so, back then we thought Pocket Secretary, that sounded really cool. But you knew it was coming. You knew it would be here someday. And instead
of Star Trek with their giant starships and teleporters, this was technology that we could theoretically see in our lifetime.
Yeah,
because it was stuff that was being worked on.
That's the second part of what drew me to that. That I thought was really cool about that technology. It felt like you were kind of getting a head start. That maybe you were a little bit of a futurist. You were a little bit of looking ahead because of your interest in cyberpunk and because of your interest in post-human and post-cyberpunk. You were getting a jump on the rest of humanity by studying where we're going. I felt like the guy who on the train, looks ahead, see where the train is going as opposed to where it's been or where it is now.
I would actually say that science fiction has often been a case of people looking ahead with, I believe, Arthur C. Clarke sort of mentally or describing what became satellites. And I think there was a story in the 30s that I believe had some sort of, and I'm drawing a blank on the specifics, but I believe it combined radio and the new technology of television to create what could have been an internet back then. And I think that's the hallmark to me of what science fiction is all about. It's often looking ahead and at what is coming or what could be coming or what could be possible, be it with social issues, technological issues, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, I just argue that cyberpunk and post-human is looking slightly more at the
near future,
the imminent future,
right.
The imminent rather than the far or distant future.
Right, but that's the thing. It's also easier to relate to because it becomes something grounded in what we understand. It's not just a wizard did it. It's a little bit more understandable. Usually has a little bit more of physical, practical, realistic basis to it.
Well, okay, so we've talked a lot about the kind of what it is. What is cyberpunk, what is post-cyberpunk, and we've talked about what we like about it. Maybe this would be a good time to start talking about the role-playing games that take these concepts and really explore them, because one of the great things about role-playing is you get to, sort of dive in with both feet and become part of that world. So, Adam, you're probably the best one to ask about this. What are some of the biggest cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk role-playing games that are out there?
Historically or currently, or do we want to start at the beginning?
Well, let's just say most influential, and you can decide which ones those are.
Okay, well, most influential long-term, obviously, we have to look at R. Talsorian's Cyberpunk and Cyberpunk 2020, which are, widely considered to be kind of like the first, pure cyberpunk game. ICE also released Cyberspace, which was less, maybe critically acclaimed and maybe a little bit burdened by, being cyberpunk skinned onto their usual system.
There were still some really important books that came out for that, like the arcology book that they created.
Yes, yeah, and I think that was probably its strength, was its diverse supplements, as opposed to its, I don't think anybody's still playing that game because it's a sweet game to play. But I suspect there's a bunch of their books still sitting on people's shelves because they're cool to read and reference.
Yeah, so I think it's the Chicago Arcology is the book I'm thinking of. And yeah, they did have some strong supplements, but the core game, not so much.
And I think that's kind of a thing. It was 89 and 88 when we got Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, and Cyberspace, all that pretty much within a year of each other.
Yeah, and of course, then there's Shadowrun, which is hugely influential, and probably in terms of sales and people playing it, the most popular cyberpunk game ever. Even though Shadowrun had some additions on top of Cyberpunk. People will be like, is Shadowrun a cyberpunk game? And it's like, yeah, of course it is. And then it has other stuff on top of it.
Yeah, which is the traditional fantasy tropes and magic.
Right, and as they play into the setting, they are treated the way other things would be treated within the setting, in that, the different meta races and magic, those deal with cyberpunk issues like, alienation, racism, all that sort of stuff too. I mean, I think they tie in relatively well, in that they're just not tacked on top of a cyberpunk setting, in my opinion.
No, that's the strength of Shadowrun, is it embraces it and makes it part of it rather than just makes it a layer on top.
It's not just like they're not just skinned on top of it for the sake of having cool meta races. They are integral to the way the story is presented. Yeah,
and I would definitely say, for example, the vast majority of my cyberpunk role-playing history would have to be Shadowrun. I've only ever played like one game, I think, of Cyberpunk 2020 as a comparison, and none at all of Cyberspace. And I've been playing for over 30 years, so.
Yeah, I definitely came into cyberpunk gaming through Shadowrun, and then exposed myself to all the other things as kind of a compare and contrast and companion to it.
I do love exposing myself. I mean, to playing games.
I didn't see that video cast. Do I have to subscribe?
No. Well, the Shadowrun love of the two hosts of this particular podcast is well documented, and we've dedicated a whole episode to it already. So before we, rather than get too much into that, I do want to take just a quick moment to say to Adam, thank you very much for producing so much high-quality content for Shadowrun. As a fan, I am incredibly grateful for all the creativity and skill that you put into it.
Oh.
And particularly, if I ever get a chance to talk to you again, I'd love to have you sign my 4th edition Shadowrun game. While no game is perfect and 4th edition has its share of maybe problem spots, it's a really, really good game. Oh. It's a fantastic game.
Thank you very much. I mean, I worked on a bunch of Shadowrun stuff, and obviously, there's a lot of, effort and, creativity and went into it, but I was always working with a great team of people, and I was very rarely steering the ship. So the people who were steering the ship, notably Rob Boyle, Peter Taylor, Jason Hardy, they all deserve a whole lot of praise for what's been going on with Shadowrun.
All right. So, yes, Shadowrun, one of the biggest ones. For the post-human or post-cyberpunk movement, I think we have to touch on Eclipse Phase.
Yeah, in terms of post...
It's the flag carrier of that movement, I would say.
I guess we are. I guess it is. Yeah, and other games Within that, there's wow, I just drew a complete mental blank. There's a transhuman fate-based.
GURPS Transhuman Space?
Yeah, GURPS Transhuman Space would actually be a better place to start because it was obviously quite popular. They have a huge amount of supplements for it, and they're still putting stuff out. It has its setting is really quite different from Eclipse Phase, which is intentional, but also I think that goes well to show like how much variety there is in post-cyberpunk setting building and fiction, and how much room there is to customize things to what you are interested in or what you want.
Okay, but I definitely want to talk about Eclipse Phase because you are the kind of head guru. Were you? Tell us about Eclipse Phase and your involvement in it. Let's start there.
Okay, it started in a bar as usual.
As most good games do.
As you do.
Actually, Eclipse Phase started when we were beginning the work on Shadowrun 4th Edition. And we were trying to decide what we were doing with 4th Edition. And we had a variety of options, because one of them which was just continue Shadowrun with the timeline as it stood, the technology as it stood. And the other was the option that we ended up going with, which was jump the timeline a little bit forward so we could tweak the technology and the setting a little bit to kind of modernize Shadowrun a little bit. Again, get rid of the giant cybernetics and pocket secretaries and whatnot. And the third option was radically jump the Shadowrun timeline ahead and heavily revise the setting into more of a post-cyberpunk game. And we ended up not doing that because, number one, we thought that it would never get approved by WizKids who owned it at the first time. And also, it was a really huge risk to take a well-loved game and change it drastically. So we ended up going with the kind of 2070 4th Edition Shadowrun setting, and then we began developing it, the future Shadowrun game as Eclipse Phase on its own, but untied to the IP, because it didn't make sense to also design a huge brand new game and have Shadowrun on the label for brand recognition purposes, which would also mean that we would have to sign the whole thing over to WizKids and they would own it. And we were not interested in that.
No. Now, who was the main creative force behind Eclipse Phase? Was that you?
No, I mean, I was involved, but the primary creators would be Rob Boyle, Brian Cross, and Jack Graham, also really heavily involved. And actually, last year, Jack Graham ended up joining Posthuman Studios as an owner.
Sweet.
Yeah, and that's been very good for us having Jack on board to doing a lot more work. He's been easing the development workload, and hopefully we're going to be seeing the fruits of that really soon.
Now, let me say, as a guy who looks at the things that come out from creators like yourself, it was really interesting. I think it was 2009 when this book first came out.
That sounds right to me. It's a little foggy.
I remember seeing this book, and it has this really fantastic title. It has a really interesting cover on it, and then you flip it on the back and you're like, okay, so what is it about? And it has these 4 lines that are four lines that are 2 sentences each, and it's just brilliant because it nailed exactly what it's about. And whoever wrote your back cover copy should get an award because it's freaking awesome. So when you flip over the book of Eclipse Phase, you read the following: your mind is software, program it. Your body is a shell, change it. Death is a disease, cure it. Extinction is approaching. Fight it. To me, that's brilliant. I think that's fantastic way to sum up what your game is about.
Well, thank you. That text, by the way, that is Rob Boyle wrote that based on a first version of it that was suggested by freelancer Malcolm Shepard. His version was a little bit different, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. But Rob was like, "I like how that sounds. Let's tweak it a little bit."
Well, Rob's got good instincts because that's pretty badass.
He does. We also, all of us hate writing back cover copy. As we were talking about things, we'd be like, wouldn't it be sweet if we didn't have to write 3 paragraphs on the back of the book? Like, what can we do that's cool, that is still, evocative? Because, I mean, when somebody looks at your book, the cover, the back cover, you don't want them to stop there. You want them to be like, that's interesting. Like, I want to see some more. You want to make sure that everyone that holds your book or sees your book opens it up.
Yeah, it's tantalizing. The back cover's supposed to tantalize.
Yeah, and I think that sort of that style of copy does a little bit more than that, as opposed to the more traditional. Here's a paragraph about the setting. Here's a paragraph about the rules, and here's a paragraph that tells you about the book. You know?
Yeah, even with Accursed, which is my most recent project, I wrote the back cover text, and it took me 2 or 3 paragraphs to write that out. And that's just the way I'd been doing it since, all of my 40K roleplay books are like that. They have, 2 or 3 paragraphs in the back to tell you what it's about. And, just hearing you say that now, we were trying to do something different. And I'm like, yeah, well, you succeeded. And you succeeded wildly. And I hope our listeners aren't too bored about 2 publishers talking about how to write back cover text. But anyway.
I mean, you can extend that out to a lot more than back cover text.
Sure.
A lot of times RPGs are written and presented in a way, not because it was consciously chosen that would be the way that it should be written and presented, but because, air quotes, that's how we've always done it.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that's how we've always done it is eventually you've always done it for so long that you forget the original reasons why it was done that way.
Exhibit A for the prosecution is Palladium books. All right.
No, they still do it that way because that's the best way.
All right.
Man, I would, total tangent here, I would love to do like a full hardcover, full color representation of Rifts.
Oh, you and me both, buddy.
I mean,
you and me both.
I don't have a whole lot of like fond teenage remembrances of Rifts, although it did get played. But I think taking that book and making it look like a 2015 book, 2016 book at this rate, I think that would...
I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Ross said almost those exact same words.
Well, Adam and I are both guys who really enjoy making a book look pretty. We're both guys who have some, pretty strong backgrounds in layout and graphic design and things, and we're both looking at riffs and going, "Man, wouldn't that be great?"
Yeah, I agree, and I think it would be a really interesting challenge to take like a beloved game and really radically update it, but also keep it grounded in what the people who already love it.
Well, let's not drift too far away. Let's go back to Eclipse Phase, and why don't you tell the listeners what it? We talked about the back cover. What is it about from your mouth when you describe Eclipse Phase?
So, Eclipse Phase is a game where technology has advanced to the point where your mind can be digitized and backed up. And that
post-singularity.
Yes, it's post-singularity. Technology has advanced far beyond our current technology. And the great thing about if your mind can be backed up, we can do 3 really important things. Number 1 is if your physical body dies, your brain and your memories and everything you know does not. It's backed up somewhere. So you can be put into a new body, and you are thus effectively immortal. And your new body would be called a morph, and that's the second important thing, is you can willingly move between different morphs. So if you may have morphs that are suitable for your character as a combatant, and you may have one that is suited for your character being a high-stakes negotiator as well. And the third thing is your consciousness, your ego, can be uploaded to another location, or what we call ego cast, and that means that you do not have to sit on a spaceship for years traveling somewhere. You can be uploaded somewhere else, put into a new morph, and then you can go about your business, whatever your business may be. And your typical business as a character in Eclipse Phase is you are a member of Firewall, and Firewall is essentially an organization of anonymous people who are trying to keep the transhumanity, post-humanity, safe from everything that may threaten them in the solar system.
Okay, that's very good. Eclipse Phase, one thing I have to say to listeners, one thing I think is great about Eclipse Phase is that you guys embraced not only presenting the future in the way that you read the book and in the way you play the game, you have embraced it in the way that you get people to the game. And I'm going to point out 2 things with that. Number 1 is, if you want to buy Eclipse Phase at, say, Gen Con or something, you can walk up and buy the physical copy. But you can also, and this is what I think is great about a game about the future, you can also buy everything on PDF on a Eclipse Phase key drive, a USB drive, and just walk away with the whole thing, which I have done, by the way.
Yeah, we only kind of do that as a special bonus thing.
But it's awesome. But it's awesome that is a game about the future where I can buy it like I'm in the future.
Right, and I believe that if you want to sell somebody something nowadays, you have to sell it to them in the format that they want it. People are like, well, can I get everything at once? Like, how do you make it really easy? How do you make it as accessible as possible? And so, yeah, you've got to kind of embrace that kind of thing. You can't be like, well, we're selling it as a hardcover book only because I really like how hardcover books look. Well, that's sweet that you really like how hardcover books look, but not everybody is you.
And the second part of that is the kind of unique nature in the way that Eclipse Phase was launched, because Eclipse Phase was launched as a free downloadable PDF.
Yes, that's kind of like, maybe that's a little bit of a misnomer. We do charge for the PDF. If you go to drive-thru, you can buy the core book for $15, which I think that might be number one of our electronic innovations. Is when we launched Eclipse Phase in 2009, we made the price $15 compared to the hardcover core book, which is $50. And everyone was like, business-wise, it's like, well, that price is too cheap, because at that point, like, a core book RPG PDF was probably $25 or $30, closer to half of the cover price. And our argument was, if it's inexpensive, we will sell enough copies to make basically the same amount of money, but we will have twice as many copies as out there, which is better for the long-term health of the game, because that's twice as many people that buy supplements, etc.
Am I wrong then? Because I seem to recall that there was a pretty big deal about Eclipse Phase being free to get.
That's the second part. Is it's also Creative Commons licensed, which
Creative Commons, no derivatives.
No. You're allowed to do derivatives. You're not allowed to do commercial derivatives. So
okay, non-commercial share alike 2.0 then.
Yes, attribution as well. So essentially that means, however you get the Eclipse Phase PDF, whether you buy it from us, or whether you download it from BitTorrent, or whether somebody file sends it to you, or, shares their Dropbox directory, that's A-okay, as long as anyone else isn't charging for it. And the reason we licensed Eclipse Phase Creative Commons is, number one, we are highly influenced by other creative works, whether they be games or movies, novels, and as something exists and people take it in, it becomes a part of you, and you can't necessarily separate that out. You can't be like, well, I'm going to make this science fiction game, but I am going to completely ignore everything that I ever learned from a William Gibson novel. Because it's just, once you've consumed stuff, it's innately a part of you. So we felt it was only fair to share it in a way that legitimizes it, things becoming innately part of somebody else. They don't have to worry about how it may influence them in the things they make. And hopefully it inspires people in the things they make beyond just their gaming.
Well, I found it to be highly inspiring based on the whole, because there's, of course there's been this thing, running through the industry about piracy, and there's this thing running, through the industry about, people trying to monetize, basically every single aspect. And it seemed to me, now you can say I'm wrong, but it seemed to me as like an outsider looking in, that you were kind of the guy who was championing, no, let's, let them have it for free. They'll still buy your stuff. And then you had some really strong sales numbers to back up that statement,
right? And
because you had given away Eclipse Phase,
right? And I mean, so the normal business model of when somebody gives something away is typically it's seen as a loss leader. We are going to give away our core book, and that is going to spur sales of our supplements because there's going to be more people playing it. And I agree with that, but I also thought that, frankly, people would still buy the electronic version because it has value to them, and some people would rather spend $15 than figure out how to download it off BitTorrent, or any other file sharing thing. And also, I think that most people are good, honest, generous people, and they understand that something costs money and time and effort to make, and that they should pay for it if they want stuff to keep coming out. I think there's an enlightened self-interest thing there. And I also think that somebody having access to the PDF for free, or at the low cost, if they like it, they're probably going to go out and buy the hardcover book, or they're going to buy the next books in the line. They're not going to, just keep air quotes, freeloading forever. Although, if you are freeloading and downloading Eclipse Phase stuff for free off BitTorrent or from a friend or whatever, that's fine too. I don't say freeloading in a moral judgment way, although most people use it that way.
you were also very transparent with like how well this was doing for you. You actually published like a number, like this is how many books we sold, which not a lot of people do that. But you were doing it again, is that, you know, this is how we're doing things differently at Posthuman. This is how we're doing things differently with Eclipse Phase. We're giving it away, and then we're telling you how well we're doing on top of that, which it was very exciting to me. Let's just
right. And honestly, we have been lax in disclosing numbers recently, not because we don't want to, but honestly, we fell behind in doing it, and it's a pretty big task to go back and re-summarize like 3 years worth of sales and like, well, and doing that. And at some point I really need to do that, because I do believe that, I think that being relatively transparent about what we're doing is good. I mean, I'm not gonna, you know, I don't go around posting how much money we make, but you know, if you're smart, you can derive that, frankly. You can
Well, if you could give us like right now, just like some kind of ballpark, how many copies of Eclipse Phase have sold, what would your answer be on that?
Oh, sure. We have sold... I actually had the stock spreadsheet open a few minutes ago, but I closed it. We have sold just under 11,000 copies of the core book in print.
Not bad.
And that's
lifetime?
That's lifetime. There's Catalyst, who did a 3,000 print run to start, and that sold out really quickly. They did a second 3,000 print run, which also sold out really quickly. And then we did a 5,000 print run when we took over all of the publishing duties. And that is going to sell out like next month, probably. We're down to a couple hundred, I think.
And for the listeners, that's really good. Like 10,000 for anybody who's not Fantasy Flight or WotC is really good, or Paizo.
Yeah, I mean, I think those numbers are... I mean, some people say that. They'll be like... people will be like, I don't want to disclose my print numbers because they're like, why would you disclose your print numbers? Aren't they embarrassing? And I'm like, well, I don't think our numbers are embarrassing in any way. And also, if they are embarrassing, well, then, okay, maybe we're doing something wrong. But also, people maybe need to understand that that's the reality of things.
Mass market fiction typically prints at 5,000 copies unless it's an already best-selling author.
Right. So thank you, Adam, for telling us all about Eclipse Phase, because the listeners wanted to know about it. I wanted to know about it. And it's good that we talk about it as one of the biggest post-cyberpunk RPGs that's currently available in the market. But I don't want to neglect our other guests. I want to actually ask Michael, can you tell us about, you mentioned this earlier, Kaze 5 is your particular entry into the cyberpunk area. If listeners want to know more about what that is, why don't you tell them?
Okay. Although I do want to ask Adam a comment. Isn't it kind of meta to be pirating electronically through a torrent a game about cyberpunk, about a cyberpunk setting?
Very meta.
Well, that's also another thing, is I do consider it that kind of meta. And I actually, if I can steal like 30 more seconds,
go ahead.
I think it's important that you look at somebody who might download a game on BitTorrent or off 4chan or whatever, and not demonize them. Because number one, you may not know why they are pirating it. They might have been unemployed for a few months, and of course everyone still has an internet connection, because you really can't get by with it. You can't apply for jobs now unless you have an internet connection. So, like, I think everyone, regardless of their financial situation, deserves to have access to entertainment. And I found that if you don't treat pirates badly, they end up supporting you. There's other games that will have like little like, please don't pirate this sidebars, or their creators will be really vocal about it. And I just don't think that does any good, because you're only going to, like, the only people that care about that are the people that are writing it, essentially. The people that are pirating it, they don't care what you think. But if you treat them well, I think they are more likely to treat you well.
I will put an addendum to that as a longtime visitor to 4chan, never poster, but I recall, and it still happens occasionally, but when Fantasy Flight books for 40K would come out, people would ask about scans, and sometimes scans would show up, but there would be caveats. They would say, look, this is a rough scan, but buy the book because we really like the products that are being made for Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader. And this is going to whet your appetite, but they aren't good, so buy the book, support the product, or else we're not going to see any more of this. And, I thought that was kind of interesting. And I'll admit, I've sometimes, taken a look at what they're posting and then said, well, I got to get this. And I've turned around and purchased products because I got a free taste through somebody showing some samples that they had scanned and posted somewhere.
So speaking of samples and posting, can you tell us about Kaze 5?
As I mentioned earlier, Kaze 5 was me combining my love for the hero system with my impressions of Shadowrun with really watching a lot of 80s anime in the 90s and wanting to make something of it. I will come out and say that I was kind of unimpressed with the Cyberhero source book that came out from ICE at the time. It felt really clunky and didn't feel like Cyberpunk to me. I decided I was going to go my own way. I eventually, developed a campaign, ran some ideas, put a lot of work into it, and went to Bruce Harlick at the time and submitted the product. It was accepted. It was my first actual published gaming product, and it was embarrassing for me to look back at it when I updated it to 6th edition, I'll be honest. But it takes a lot of tropes and combines them together into a near future, the year is 2030, North America that is all divided up after the Second Civil War into about 9 different countries. And it gives everything that you're going to kind of want. There's, the powered armor, there's the cat girls, there's the espers, there's the wireless connectivity, there's the cyberware. So, all of that put into a place where I think people can really have fun with it. However, it does have a darker side to it. The fact that, much like Blade Runner, artificial people are produced and sold just like appliances. There is the question of whether there will be that somewhat brighter transhuman future as things get better, or will it all sort of spiral down? And the players can be part of that if they want.
Isn't the really unique thing about Kaze 5 the fact that it brings in all those 80s anime tropes and really kind of makes them center stage, particularly the espers?
Yeah. And it is a case of where I had to acknowledge the changes in technology. So, I had to really... It couldn't be all rainy and dark and horrible, because if there's no more fuel, you're going to use something else. And it does utilize that sort of, if anybody's ever seen Akira, that's what we mean when we say espers, guys who can stop tank shells with their mind and teleport around the world and rip apart stuff by looking at it. And that's what a lot of people have liked about it, that there is... I feel I did a really good job of incorporating those concepts and allowing you to defining how they would work in the setting in a way that really fit the source material and was playable.
Yeah, and it's very cool. I should say, for full disclosure, that I have my own stuff in there with regards to some of the things that I've worked on have sort of influenced Kaze 5, and I actually have a small writing credit in it. So when I say you should go out and buy it, you should definitely do that, but not because of my work. You should do it because of Michael's work.
And I am working on a supplement for it right now, Kaze 5 System Upgrade. If you like the core book, or if you've already owned the core book, we'll be producing, probably by Gen Con next year, there will be a supplement with a little more cyberware, a little more Esper powers, a couple of adventures, and this time there'll be actually some essays. I'm asking a couple people to maybe give me 1,000 words on different little subjects so that it becomes more than just a source book. It just talks about the setting and concepts relating to the setting in general. And I'm really happy with how it's coming along so far.
And I'm looking forward to that as well. And at this point, we should take a quick break.
Hi, this is Rich.
And Amanda.
For Animation Celebration. We have a great show going on March 28th through the 30th at the Hilton Garden Inn in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Come meet Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, and Steve Cardenas, the Red Power Ranger. We have an exclusive VIP ticket for dinner with Kevin Conroy. Come meet your favorite voice actor in person.
We have a lot of other great guests coming, like Matt Hill, Raphael from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Big Ed from Ed, Edd and Eddy. We've got actors from everything from Disney shows to My Little Pony. Check out the area, Ghostbusters, and more. Tickets are available online right now at www.animation-celebration.com. We even have a Big Lebowski night. We look forward to seeing you all there.
And we're back with episode 22 of the Gamers Tavern with Michael Surbrook and Adam Jury. And we just got done talking about Eclipse Phase, and we got done talking about Kaze 5. And we're kind of going to need to dive into some of the maybe lesser-known RPGs of this particular genre tonight, our topic being cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk / post-human.
I kind of think we should talk about the big daddy that we only kind of glossed over.
What's that?
The game called Cyberpunk.
Well, we did talk about it a little bit, but you're right. Maybe we should get a little more into that. So
for one thing, the original Cyberpunk book was Cyberpunk 2013.
Was it really?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so Cyberpunk, which probably the best known version is Cyberpunk 2020, is the name of that. It came out from Telsorian Games, designed by Mike Pondsmith. Much like many of the other games we're going to mention here, I don't think as a core product it was played very much, but it had a lot of very interesting, useful, and in some cases influential supplements.
Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads is one of my favorite source books.
The Chrome books had a lot of really cool content in it for guys who liked cybernetics. Night City was a fairly interesting setting. Can Michael, Adam, you guys have any experience with Cyberpunk 2020 to share?
I did play a couple of sessions of it a very long time ago. But I do own a Chromebook, and I do recall seeing the most recent version and being very confused by the art in it.
Yes, the most recent version, of course. Spoonie also covered this on his show. The most recent version of Cyberpunk, all the artwork was photos of G.I. Joe dolls who were made to look like Cyberpunk characters, and then given like a filter. It was a very strange and questionable choice.
Hilarious choice.
Hilarious. I don't think they intended it to be hilarious, but yeah. And then the pages all felt like they were on a glossy magazine. It was very. It was not the kind of book that made me want to buy it. Let's just put it that way.
But there was one thing I wanted to talk about with Cyberpunk, and that was specifically the GURPS Cyberpunk book that they did.
Yeah, this is not Cyberpunk 2020. This is specifically the GURPS role-playing game, which had the GURPS Cyberpunk source book.
Yeah, and this was, and I don't know if either of you guys read Bruce Sterling's Hacker Crackdown.
No.
I have, but not for well over a decade.
Yeah, this was a book that was talking about the Secret Service in the late 80s and early 90s really, really cracked down hard on computer hacking because the internet was kind of starting to spread. BBSs were a big thing, and they were trying to crack down a lot of these things. And one of the things they did was Steve Jackson Games hired a guy called Lloyd Blankenship to write their GURPS Cyberpunk book. He was also known online as The Mentor and was famous in hacker circles for writing something called the Hacker Manifesto. That's the thing that was read off, if you've seen the movie Hackers. They read it off in there. What happened was, on March 1st, 1990, the Secret Service came in armed to the Steve Jackson offices and took pretty much all their computers and a bunch of their original manuscripts, calling them, quote, handbooks for computer crime. They refused to return the manuscripts, and Steve Jackson Games pretty much had to rewrite the entire book from older drafts. Steve Jackson Games sued, and it was also one of the first cases for the newly founded Electronic Frontier Foundation, who defended them against the search, and out of three claims they made in their lawsuit against the Secret Service, they won 2 of them and got over $300,000 in damages and legal fees from them, because basically they thought that a role-playing game book about cyberpunk was somehow, way, shape, or form a manual for how to actually steal money online using tools that weren't invented for money that didn't exist.
Wait. Are you trying to tell me the American government misinterpreted someone's game and overreacted? Not in this country.
Shocking. They were actually claiming that it was how to build devices to steal credits that were in the game were actual things that existed.
Yes, it was a disturbing overreaction. And, the best part is, of course, Steve Jackson turned it around and sold many, many, many more copies of the book by putting a big splash image on the front of the book that said, "This was seized by the U.S. Secret Service." Caused Mike Surbrook to have a spit take.
You okay, Mike? I think we just killed Michael.
It was a spit take. But yes, Steve Jackson turned that around and just sold tons and tons and tons of books because it was seized by the Secret Service, just sort of epitomizing that whole "there is no such thing as bad press" concept.
Okay, Michael, are you okay? And more importantly, is your computer okay? Okay, good.
I was able to cough all the water right back into the glass it came out of, so I'm not going to drink that anymore.
Nice.
I think the Secret Service
All right.
case is
So, yeah,
kind of
that's-
interesting too. There's still a huge amount of misinformation about it. And I wouldn't have brought this up, except I was literally at a party last night, and there were some people playing Munchkin, and somebody started talking about Steve Jackson Games and was like, "Oh yeah, one of their books was seized by the Secret Service years ago," and then they won a lawsuit and they won $60 million, and and
I'm
I
sure
was
they wish.
like playing another game. I was not really involved in that conversation, and so I was kind of like, I don't think they earned quite that much, and then I just kind of left it at that because I actually did not know that other person and did not really want to be like, you're wrong, dude.
I would be very
Actually-
surprised if that
Well,
was that much money.
I had heard,
Yeah, it was,
I had heard that the
and even I was kind of misrepresenting it when I said $300,000. $250,000 of that was attorney's fees. $50,000 of it was lost revenue, and they paid for because Steve Jackson Games at the time had to lay off about half their employees to keep the doors open and get that book out, and they showed actual financial harm, and that's where they got $43,000 from, and then the 17 employees at the time got $1,000. They were awarded $1,000 each for the employees.
Okay.
And then there was $250,000 in legal fees. I actually read the entire friggin' court documents
That
before
is
this. I really wanted to get this in the show.
That is details I did not know. So
Yeah, I really wanted to get that on the show because I spend an hour reading court documents, and I hate reading court documents.
all right.
I will do it if I have to, but I
I remember hearing, I believe the judge almost laughed it out of court, not at Steve Jackson, but at the Secret Service for what they did, or something to that effect.
yeah, the ruling is kind of it for a court document. It's kind of funny to read. He gave them even Steve Jackson Games on the. By the way, if you want to read all these court documents because you're crazy like I am, they're on the Steve Jackson Games website, and I'll have a link in the show notes to their take on the whole thing and all the links that they have to all the court documents that were filed and blah blah blah. The words that were used on their website was tongue lashing. It was basically the word incompetence came up many times.
Well, it's also a
And
good reflection, though, of like
The tone was incredulous.
this
that they even
is a good reflection of what Cyberpunk is about, though, because it's about when the government comes in and seizes your documents because they're potentially harmful. That is exactly like what Cyberpunk is in many cases, because the information, because of the data, could be damaging to the country. I think Adam would agree with me that that's also just a good reflection of what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good example of how quickly different aspects of society move, because in the early 90s, cyberpunk was, well represented in fiction, becoming more represented in games. Obviously, there had been some movies that were on the cyberpunk theme with more to come. And here's the government trying to, that can't parse the difference between real world hacking and fictional hacking. And that's really interesting because the lines there were really blurred because Lloyd Blankenship was involved in phone hacking and whatnot as well, but they still were not able to see the difference. When I think it should have been relatively obvious if they'd been, monitoring as much communications as I think they had been.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about another game too because we've talked about Cyberpunk 2020, but there's actually a sequel to Cyberpunk 2020. That I think is not only a really interesting game, not only a very interesting subject, but I believe it is also one of the few games I would point to as saying this kind of bridges the gap between Cyberpunk and post-Cyberpunk and post-humanism, and that's Cyber Generation. Are either of you guys familiar with Cyber Generation?
I know of
A
it,
bit.
but I've actually never read Cyber Generation.
So Cyber Generation, basically what happens is the world of Cyberpunk 2020 has a thing called the Nano Plague, where these miniature machines break out and they kind of infect a large portion of the world, and it reshapes the whole cyberpunk aspect into a slightly more nanotechnological approach, where you have some of the holdovers from the Cyberpunk 2020 world. Like they have a character called Spider, I believe, who's basically Spider Jerusalem, and they have Johnny Silverhand and those guys who are now mentoring the new generation of heroes. And the new generation of heroes are all people that have been altered by the nanoplague in different ways. So you have a guy, he can modify his body to become weapons with the nano metal that's in his bones, or another guy who can use his nano augmented senses to study the electrical impulses of your brain and basically read your mind. There were some really, really cool and interesting approaches of how nanotechnology could be basically magic, if you want to put it that way, in this new future. But what I loved about it is it was deliberately showing you the end of the cyberpunk and the beginning of the post-human side of things. And I thought it was really influential and interesting because of that. Maybe should have been influential, but it didn't turn out to be quite such a big seller. But there you go.
Yeah, it came out in like 93, so it was way ahead of the curve, even when it comes to nanotechnology. Because that was theorized science in 93. That wasn't, because we do have nanotechnology now. It's just not. We haven't gotten quite to awesome levels yet, but
if any of our listeners out there are fans of both cyberpunk and post-human and really interested to see like the way that one becomes the other, I strongly encourage you to go out and take a look at Cyber Generation if you can, because Cyber Generation is just not only a really interesting look at it, it's well written, it's got a really nice, what we'd like to call adventuring paradigm, and it's got the different niches set up for how these characters work together very well. And plus, you're playing younger characters. It was kind of superhero-y, wasn't it? Well, you're playing younger characters. The idea is you're playing barely teens and teenagers. So what they had done is they said we're tired of the old rich super professional cyberpunk. We want to see what happens when a bunch of basically young punks come treading on their territory and see what happens. So that's what Cyber Generation is all about, and I do highly recommend it as something people should definitely check out if you're interested in these kinds of things.
I don't think this sale is still going to be going on when the episode is posted, but it is. It's on sale in the Drive-Thru's Valentine's Day sale right now too. It's under $10.
So there you go. Go check it out.
Hey Ross, your comment about data. I know this isn't a cyberpunk game, but I think it's a telling thing that when I watched the movie Johnny Mnemonic, in which we found out the future would have no lights. One of the things that
and dolphins.
One of the things that actually I found one of my problems with it is they made a big deal about the data that Keanu Reeves had in his head, and I thought this is 320
gigs.
But I thought, it doesn't matter what that data is. This is cyberpunk. Data's data. It's important to somebody. It doesn't have to save the world. It just has to be data somebody's willing to kill for. And in true cyberpunk fashion, you should never know what it is. That's one of the mysteries. It was just a thought I had.
Yeah, I would say
based on your comment.
No, I would. Well, there's many, many, many things you could do to improve Johnny Mnemonic as a film. But yes, one of those things would be to make it more cyberpunk, and one way to do that would be to basically conceal the nature of the data.
Yeah, we talked about Johnny Mnemonic on our gaming and film episode, and I've just got one line I want to repeat from that. When your best actors in your film giving the best performances are Dolph Lundgren and Henry Rollins, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on, because there actually is quite a few games in the gaming area that have to do with cyberpunk and post-human stuff. I was kind of reaching back into the past with Cyber Generation. Maybe slightly more recent is stuff like D20 Modern and D20 Future and Ex Machina. Do you guys know anything about those?
I worked for the publisher of Ex Machina when it came out. Ex Machina was a tri-stat-based cyberpunk role-playing game from Guardians of Order, and it used their universal tri-stat rules, the ones that could scale for different die sizes.
It was Big Eye, Small Mouth was the big core. System
it was derived off that, and then it had 3 or I think 4 actual distinct settings in there, written by different freelance authors. And it was a one-off release. Guardians they did a cyberpunk and an urban fantasy one in the same series called Dreaming Cities, but that was the only ones that got released before shuttering.
Okay.
I do own a copy of it. I think it's a very handsome volume.
Oh, there we go.
And they did do a D20 version of that as well.
No, that actually never got released. Nope.
Oh, it didn't?
I would say Adam is the expert on this one.
I'm going to take his word over Wikipedia. So I actually have that in my show notes. I trust anything Adam Jury says over Wikipedia.
Well, this is another
literally
factor
in my notes.
This is another factor of Cyberpunk, though. Right here is the validity of data and how we process that and work with that in our daily lives. Most people tend to take Wikipedia as an authority, and this is just a good example of maybe why we shouldn't. And that's one of the things that Cyberpunk does. It makes you think about the ways you deal with information.
But there was a D20 Cyberpunk system built into the D20 future. That was Chris Perkins, Rodney Thompson, and J.D. Wilker designed that one. It was basically all forms of sci-fi, but there was some cyberpunk in it. Then they had D20 Cyberspace that came out, and that was Owen Casey Stevens designed that one. It was more cybernetics, and it had a cyberpunk campaign called Cyber Rave.
I'm going to say this. I think of all the games we've talked about, possibly the one I've seen the absolute least talked about or played around the table is D20 Future and D20 Modern. For some reason, I just don't, especially in my area, those games just never took off. Now that maybe not.
I tried a couple of times to run that because I always wanted to run Shadowrun. No one wanted to learn another system other than D&D, so I kind of had to shoehorn it where I could. And it's the biggest problem with it, and the reason why I don't think it took off that well, is that the sort of level-based advancement you have in D&D doesn't really work in a cyberpunk-style game or any sci-fi game, really.
And one more I want to briefly touch on about one of the games of the past that has to do with cyberpunk is SLA Industries, which is a very interesting and unique setting. Adam, Michael.
Slay Industries.
The pronunciations vary. What do you guys think of it?
I know of it. I have no experience with it. For some reason, I categorize it with Unknown Armies. I think I got those always confused a lot. Although I have played Unknown Armies.
They're both a little surreal, so that's fair. The key thing about SLA Industries was that it was full of corporations in the future, and you're sort of fighting for your freedom. But the most unique bit about that was it was all basically revealed in the end that it was all a dream. That the truth...
Oh, you're talking about the truth document.
Yeah, the truth behind the setting is that it was all a hallucination.
That was something I had in the notes. What happened was the editor at the time, and I'm going to butcher this name, I'm sure, Tim Dedopoulos. I suck at Greek names, I'm sorry. But he was on a mailing list in 1998, and he put the game's Bible, which was called The Truth, in the mailing list for people to read. And this, before then, it was like freelancers had to sign NDAs. You will not tell anyone the secrets behind this. And then they put it out in a mailing list. And they've since revoked any sort of open license. You cannot share this legally. So don't try to track it down. They don't print it anymore. But yeah, Cubicle 7 put it on their website when they got the license for it, and then they yanked it off too. Because apparently nobody was happy about that.
It's fair to say SLA Industries is a quirky game in a quirky setting that does have some cool cyberpunk bits to it. I have a copy of it, but mostly just for novelty value. Okay, and maybe definitely coming into the more modern era, we've got things like Corporation, A State, Alpha Omega, Halcyon, and Tech Noir. The only thing I can say about Tech Noir is I know it was designed by the guy that did the game that was based on the monks. Jeremy, his first name is Jeremy, and his last name is, I should probably look this up.
Is it Jeremy Kellner?
It is Jeremy Keller, yeah, and it was based on the game he had done previous to it, which was called Chronica Feudalis. So yeah, Tech Noir was done by a Kickstarter, I believe, and it's basically mystery detective noir mixed with cyberpunk. I honestly haven't played it. I do know Jeremy, and I do know some of the people that worked on it, and it apparently won some awards, so I assume that maybe one of you guys might be able to share more light on it, but that's all I know.
I don't know much about that game specifically. I remember the Kickstarter, but it is indicative of something that's going on in the past few years. There have been a lot of independent games that have been coming out that are in cyberpunk, in some cases straight throwbacks to pure cyberpunk.
Yeah, and those would be stuff like Alpha Omega and Nova Praxis and Interface Zero. Nova Praxis, I would say, is actually more post-human. It's like post-human with a slight more dash of sci-fi in it. Adam, are you familiar with
a little bit?
Novopraxis?
Yeah,
Have you
actually,
seen
it was
that
the one whose name I could not remember earlier. That Novopraxis was what I was thinking of.
I had to ask a friend of mine on Facebook and like, dude, what was that? What was that game? Tell me about it. It's beautiful. The PDF that they did for that with the enhanced features, where you can basically like page through the PDF like you're in a Star Trek holodeck. It's pretty awesome.
It gets a lot of praise. I haven't read it all. I think it takes a little more of like a hard sci-fi approach, but I might be remembering it wrong.
Yeah, I agree. It seems more sci-fi to me, but it definitely has a post-human feel to it as well.
I seem to think that they are working on a new version of it.
Yeah, for Savage Worlds, I believe, because it's originally Fate.
It was Fate before Fate Core came out, if I remember rightly.
That's possible. I couldn't swear to that. Alpha Omega is a game that I own mostly because it's very pretty. It has a lot of art in it by a guy named Matt Bradbury. That's it. And Matt, we kind of ended up yanking him from those guys and put him over to 40K because he was so good. And unfortunately, as soon as Matt left, I think Alpha Omega crashed and burned, which is a shame because it was kind of an interesting looking game. Where it was like Alpha Omega struck me as basically what if you took Shadowrun, but instead of all the fantasy tropes, you put in the whole religious angels versus demons tropes into Cyberpunk.
Oh, I remember this one now.
It was a neat idea, and the books were all laid out landscape format, which is kind of bizarre, but it definitely added to the whole strange feeling of it.
If that's a PDF, that's actually a bonus. I always like the landscape on a PDF.
I don't know if I'm pretty sure they are PDFs somewhere, but I own the physical copies of them, and they look weird. They look weird on my shelf because they're right. I have to stock them next to all my BattleTech TROs because they're all done layout style.
And if there is a PDF, I will track it down and put a link in the show notes.
I'm pretty sure that the PDFs are still available, but actually their website is completely down and was as of like a few months ago because I was kind of curious, like, hey, they haven't done anything in a while, so I did a little bit of nosing around, and so it seems like they are finished. But the PDFs are still up on drive-thru.
Does anybody have anything else they can say about some of these other things we talked about? A-State or Corporation?
Those are all new titles to me, honestly. I've not even heard of those.
Okay. Yeah, well, some of them are so new that I just haven't had any exposure to them either. Okay, so let's take another step back then. Let's talk about some games that maybe are not completely Cyberpunk, but definitely have some influences from Cyberpunk in them. And these would have to be the more well-known ones. So I think we want to start with one that's actually got a Kickstarter going for it right now for a new edition, and that is Mutant Chronicles. With Mutant Chronicles was, of course, set in the future where there was a lot of cyber technology, a lot of corporations. In fact, all of the major factions in Mutant Chronicles are mega corporations. As far as I'm aware, there are no real, nation states. It's all based on the corporations that run things in the future. And there's one of those corporations is actually called Cybertech, I believe.
Mutant Chronicles was one of those games that, like, the times it was popular and being published was like a little bit before I got into gaming, and once I got into gaming, it already kind of petered out for a bit. So
Cybertronic. I'm sorry, the company name is Cybertronic, but yeah. Yeah, it was early. I agree, Adam. I was the same way. I was like, it was out and I saw it, but by the time I started getting into gaming, it was
done. So I'm kind of interested to check it out. I'm just scrolling through their Kickstarter right now. Their page designs look pretty nice.
Well, there's a lot of guys who worked with me at Fantasy Flight who are now working on that particular project, like John Dunn and Jason Marker. So there's that. That's one. Adam and I actually brought this up earlier. Rifts also has quite a bit of cyberpunk stylings
along
to
with
it
everything else you
ways,
could think of.
Which, of course, that's true. But it's not unfair to say though that there are significant portions of Rifts that are based on cyberpunk tropes and cyberpunk, materials.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've actually, I think almost every time we've done a genre show, we've brought up Rifts because it smashes into every other genre. So
I think the most cyberpunk of all the Rift source books, which I bought just for the art, was Rifts Japan. I mean, I'd like to download my consciousness into a 40-foot-tall cybernetic dragon and wreak havoc.
Because you can. You can also be a cybernetic ninja next to the supernatural ninja, next to the guy who's secretly a dragon but who's also a ninja. Okay, and Warhammer 40,000, all of the different Warhammer 40K role-playing games have got cybernetics as a big feature because it seems like every single person in the Imperium of Man has some kind of bionic part, typically a head tube or some kind of arm or leg or maybe an eye. Yeah, the cybernetics are a big thing in that universe.
And instead of our Blade Runner replicants, you get servitors.
Yes, servitor. Well, because artificial intelligence is blasphemous in Warhammer 40K, all of their guys who would otherwise be robots are actually lobotomized human beings or cloned flesh tissue that is then cybernetically wired into whatever technology they need it to run, which is kind of cool, but at the same time, kind of creepy.
I think the whole, are you still human under all that is perfectly illustrated with the, probably going to get it wrong, is it the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests who, are just, at times, are basically just a spider web of machine parts?
Yes, well, they definitely embrace it far more than anyone else in that setting. But, actually the whole what is human thing is not really quite as big a trope in 40K. They really, they pretty much assume everyone's, yay human, because the whole Imperium is all about yay human. We're all humans, all right, woo! Everything that isn't human sucks, kill it. So, yeah, the whole question of whether we are or aren't human based on cybernetics, I would say that's probably really not an issue, unless in some very, very small niche places. But then we get to things like paranoia, which definitely has, there's a whole secret society dedicated to replacing your flesh with bionics.
Computer is your friend.
Of course, the computer being the monolithic authority figure in that setting. And it is very dystopian. And
calling computer monolithic is traitors. Please report to the nearest termination chamber.
What you don't know is that I have ultraviolet security clearance citizens.
Oh, am I allowed to be on this? I don't think I have that kind of clearance. I'm wearing a black shirt. I could be in trouble.
Well, the Gamers Tavern colors are black and red.
Oh, we're all doomed.
Well, see, my color, again, is ultraviolet. You're seeing it, but you're not really seeing it, if you see what I mean.
Well, there's also I guess there's also a little of transhumanism in that, and with all the cloning and the mutant powers due to cloning and such. It's...
What mutant powers? Mutant powers are a commie traitor's plot. Sorry, I love paranoia. It is, yes.
You're right. It is communist plot.
Comrade. Did he just say comrade?
It is communist plot.
Zap, zap, zap.
Yeah, so paranoia definitely embraces some of that as well. And there's a book by...
And with its traditional tongue-in-cheek fashion. I love paranoia. I'm surprised. It's come up a couple of times on the show. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it more, though.
Well, paranoia... Such a blast. The strength of paranoia is also its weakness in that it's great comedy, but it's just... It doesn't sustain.
They tried to do it serious as like a dark dystopian thing, and I think it was 3rd edition where they tried to do that, and it just didn't.
Paranoia is something I'd love to play at a convention, but I would probably balk at trying to do a long campaign.
No, I've always felt it makes a great one-shot. Actually, gentlemen, I just looked over my shoulder at my shelves, and something that combines a little bit of post-humanism, transhumanism, and cyberpunk would be Blue Planet. Uplifted animals, genetically augmented humans, and cybernetics to allow you to, remain underwater and so on. That's all through that setting.
True. And there's also GURPS Cthulhu Punk, which mixes in the Cthulhu mythos to add into all the what is human tropes and the fears that we already have. We're going to add on top of that Cthulhu.
And let's not forget Feng Shui.
Feng Shui, yes, although that's I would argue that's a very small part of that.
Well, the our bio and our carnal wear from the Architects of the Flesh. But yes, that's just one small segment. But they do have cybernetic apes, and really, that's a win right there.
That is totally a win, I would agree. And I think if we don't have much more to say about these types of games, I'm going to give Adam and Michael...
There's one more game I kind of wanted to bring up. It's not a role-playing game. It's a tabletop game called Netrunner.
Well, Netrunner, Netrunner is also part of the Android universe, which includes games like... Well, Android. And then there's, of course, if you're going to go down that route, we're going to have to talk about the Hackers tabletop game by Steve Jackson.
Well, the original Netrunner was supposed to be a Cyberpunk trading card game in '96.
It still is a Cyberpunk.
From Wizards of the Coast.
It still is a Cyberpunk.
It's in Cyberpunk 2020.
Was it? Oh.
Yes, it was licensed. They had some of the characters from it, and the designer of Cyberpunk 2020 showed up as a character in the card game.
I see.
And this was the first collectible card game from Wizards of the Coast the second one that was not Magic the Gathering was Magic the Gathering, then Jihad, which was the Vampire the Masquerade one. Then they did Netrunner, and then Fantasy Flight Games released it as a living card game where you just buy the box of the cards instead of having to buy little trading packs.
And they released it as an Android Universe game.
Yes, it's now Android Netrunner.
Okay.
And it is apparently very, very well regarded.
Yes, it is.
As a tabletop game. So I don't know if you knew anything about that from the insider.
Well, I shared just everything I had on it just then. So.
Okay.
Let's ask our guests if they have any other games they want to chat about, and then we're going to kind of segue into the final section of our podcast.
Actually, 2 games that I just thought of while we were talking. Number 1, there was also an official licensed Cyberpunk CCG in 2003 by a company called Social Games, and I think it was the only thing they ever did. And I obviously I don't think it did very well because it looks like you can buy boxes for about $15 each on eBay right now. And in card games, there was also a Shadowrun CCG.
I never heard of it. Oh yeah, I actually have my Dirk Montgomery card. That's the only.
Yeah, I
card
actually found a whole
have.
bunch of old CCG stuff while digging around a few weeks ago. I'm like, oh yeah, these games existed. And in modern Cyberpunk RPGs, there's also Always Never Now from Will Heinmark, which was a Kickstarter project last year, I think. And that's a very action-focused Cyberpunk role-playing game, which I have not had chance to play yet, but it looks pretty interesting.
That sounds interesting. I've never heard of it until now.
It's up on drive-thru as a pay-what-you-want project, actually. It's a very, as far as I know, it's a very self-contained game setting plus adventures all in the core pack.
Well, I need to make a special mention about Interface Zero. Interface Zero is a new game that came out for Savage Worlds, I think, last year or the year before. And we got review copies of that, so we are going to actually review that game on this podcast. But at the time of this particular broadcast, we have not completed our study of it. But it looks very interesting.
Also, we didn't mention Underground from Mayfair Games, which is like a futuristic America gone crazy politics plus biomodifications game, written by Ray Winnegar, if I believe correctly, and published in the mid-90s.
Wasn't that illustrated by the guy that worked with Frank Miller on some really crazy comics? I mean, really, really intricate artwork from, I can't remember the guy's name.
I don't know the guy's name.
If I'm thinking of the right game.
I think you're the art was really color comic-y, very gonzo. And it was one of the...
I'm trying to remember the comic that he worked on with, if it's who I think it is. I think it was Hard Boiled or something about the policeman, and just incredibly detailed panels. And I associate that art, and I think he did like maybe a cover or some artwork on it, but I do recall Underground.
Underground was also one of the first RPGs that was like a full-color glossy rulebook release. It's kind of several years ahead of the curve there.
Well, we're going to get the Imperial Guard mad at us if we stay too long in the tavern, so we better bring it back down to talk about our guests a little bit. Adam, I just wanted to say one last thing about Eclipse Phase. I know you're going to probably tell us all about what's new for that, but something a little old for that most people may not know. If you buy Eclipse Phase and you read Eclipse Phase, you get to read about a space station made out of bacon.
I knew, as soon as you said space station, I knew which one you were talking about.
Because that's kind of awesome.
There's
everything's better with bacon.
There's a space station called Meathab. Meathab is it's a space station, but I mean Meathab is also sentient, so Meathab is a character as well.
Wow.
Sentient bacon space station.
One of the great things
How
about
is this
Eclipse
not
Phase,
spread through the internet already?
I don't know, like maybe we need to do more about Meathab. But one of the things I like about EP is
throw in some cats, man. Throw in some cats. Seriously, you'll be front page Reddit every.
That is actually like one of the golden Eclipse Phase rules is there's no canon cat girls. That's a hard limit for us. But one of the things I really like about
cats in general, not cat girls.
One of the things I really like about EP is because the universe is so vast, we can throw in things that are really off the wall, like Meathab, and they can be consistent with the setting. But if you think Meathab is just like a little too far out for your sci-fi tastes, the setting is vast enough that you can never go near it. You can really ignore it.
I see what you did there for your tastes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so Adam, why don't you tell the listeners what is the latest thing that you've been working on and where they can find that on the interwebs?
The latest Eclipse Phase release is Transhuman, which is like the advanced player's guide, and it has alternate character creation rules. It has a random path-based system. So you can, the great thing about Eclipse Phase is you can die during character generation and still play that character. You can use those rules either randomly or by just building a character using the path system. It also has some like optional morphs, some additional role-playing guidelines. So it's a follow-up to the core book that's useful for both players and GMs.
You can pretty much die almost any time in Eclipse Phase, and that's not going to stop you from playing that character.
That is correct, and that is a selling point.
Right. Okay. And where can we learn more about this new release?
Up on eclipsephase.com, we have links to all of our releases. All of our stuff's on DriveThruRPG as well, if you prefer electronic stuff.
Cool.
Eclipsephase.com, there's a page that says releases, all of our books, electronic stuff, all of that is cataloged there. And
if I remember correctly, there's actually quite a few Shadowrun writers who are now writing for Eclipse Phase. So if you follow, guys like T.S. Lukert or some of the other guys you have on your stable of writers there.
Yeah, because we had worked with those writers before, of course, some of them ended up working on Eclipse Phase too. So yeah, there's a few well-known names.
Bobby Deary.
Yep, Bobby Deary did a blog called Farcast. It's farcastblog.com. And every day last year, he posted an Eclipse Phase setting tidbit that he'd written himself. So he's got 365 of them, and they're all categorized. I'm just looking at he has 104 NPCs, 99 are labeled tech, 60 are labeled locations. So there's just all sorts of different snippets. And then at the end of the year, I think he compiled it into a PDF document as well, so you can kind of grab them.
Yeah, it was like 250,000 words.
Honestly, he wrote more stuff for Eclipse Phase that year than we did.
Wow, that's impressive.
At least published. So that was a very impressive effort. And he checked in every couple of months. He's like, "Hey, have you seen all the new stuff?" And I haven't had a chance to read it all yet, but it was a pretty impressive. It kind of like a love letter to Eclipse Phase in a way, which is very flattering.
And Mike Surbrook's been waiting patiently for this whole podcast to talk about the new releases that he has just gotten into the works. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about what you've got coming out lately and where we can find that?
I have submitted 2 manuscripts to Blackworm Games. I'll talk about the shorter one first. It's called, in keeping with naming conventions of certain hero products, it's called Ghosts, Ghouls, and Golems, a hero system sourcebook for the supernatural. It is a guide to classic supernatural entities, vampires, ghosts, werewolves, golems, wendigo, ghouls, with an emphasis more on what the creature's about as opposed to endless pages of character sheets. So you get an introduction to the creature, you get historical accounts of ghosts or ghouls, including real-world people eating other people. You get some templates or character sheets. You get a nice breakdown of what you're doing, including examples from around the world, so that even if you're not a hero gamer, you could probably use it as a source of ideas for just about any system.
So it's a bestiary where the monsters are not just a big blob of stats.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
And capitalizing on public domain, you get hero system character sheets for Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, Jack the Ripper. And since I go all the way up into the modern era, and keeping with our cyberpunk theme, the last guy in the book is a hero system character sheet for Slender Man.
How is that cyberpunk?
It's an internet meme.
Ah, okay. That's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, and what's the other book?
The other book is something that I am really proud of, and I blame Ken Hite for giving me the idea, and he's really upset about that. But it's now called Larger Than Life, Adventures in American Folklore. It is 145,000 words. And what it is, it's a breakdown of archetypical or American archetypes from 1700 to 1900, with an emphasis on the folklore or mythical look that these characters took. And when I say archetypes, they're very broad. There's the pirate, the continental soldier, the backwoodsman, the cowboy, the occupational hero, the lawman, the inventor, the eccentric, and so on. And much like the previous book, you get a primary example of that archetype written up in full detail, full background, as complete and accurate to the tall tales, usually, as I could make it. So you get Blackbeard and John Henry and Paul Bunyan and Nikola Tesla and Stagger Lee and Emperor Norton and Wild Bill Hickok. And then once you get through that...
Davy Crockett, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Oh, he's not legendary at
backwards-
all. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But, it would be kind of boring just to see one guy, so there are anywhere from 3 to a dozen biographies of similar characters. So I talk about a dozen different pirates. I talk about half a dozen other inventors or a scattering eccentrics or other people who were lumberjacks and so on, from the tall tales and reality, and give you an idea who they were and what they did and what made them so spectacular. And then you get a template so you can build your own. And also other add-ons like lexicons or little quotes of lyrics or pieces of songs. Or for the sailor, I even talk about famous ships all through American history.
Where can we find this information about these releases?
You're gonna have to the Hero message boards, the Hero website. There's some press releases talking about some of these products that are out. Blackworm should have something soon, I hope. Both of them have gone.
What's the Blackworm website?
I believe it says blackworm.com.
Okay. And that's Blackworm with a WYRM.
Yes. And their RPG section. I know Larger Than Life has gone to layout, and I am really, really hoping that you can come by and get the copies at Gen Con.
All right. Well, Daryl and I are both extremely grateful that you guys came and joined us tonight to talk about Cyberpunk and post-Cyberpunk, post-human games. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the Gamers Tavern. We're really glad to have you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, and again, I'm a big fan of both of your work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the new stuff that's coming out from both of you guys to kind of add more to that body of work that you're well known for. Daryl, you got anything else we want to say on Cyberpunk games before we close this out?
Trying to think of something, a witty one-liner, and I'm just not right now. I'm too
All
tired.
right, well, that's fine. So that's the end of this episode of the Gamers Tavern. And until next time, may all your hits be crits.
Well, that about wraps things up for Gamers Tavern this week. Comments time. Yeah, I've been slacking a little bit on these. I apologize. But if you'd like to get your comment on air, leave us feedback on our website, gamerstavern.org. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/gamerstavern, or you can review us on iTunes or email me directly at abstruse@gamerstavern.org. The first is a review from Lars Technoviking, who I actually got to chat with a bit on Reddit in the Shadowrun subreddit. He writes, Daryl and Ross have a great dynamic in discussing all aspects of the topic at hand for each episode. Like many others, I first heard about this in relation to their Shadowrun episode. With only a few seemingly required hiccups in sound quality that every podcast seems to go through during their first few episodes, the quality of guests, content, and delivery has been nothing but top-notch since. If you enjoy tabletop gaming in any form, role-playing games, board games, or other such nerditry, I highly recommend you give this podcast a shot. Thank you very, very much, Lars. And I actually, like I said, talked to Lars a bit on the Shadowrun subreddit, which I'm kind of a regular on. Anyway, I think some of the things he's talking about are very, very early episodes, which, yeah, I was still learning what the hell I was doing. And he may also be talking about the Gamers Tavern Game Table, which is our new Shadowrun actual play podcast that comes out every Monday. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please check that out. It's actually becoming pretty damn popular. I'm a little surprised it's taken off as much as it has. But yeah, thank you to all our fans and all our listeners. But yeah, those episodes are rough because it's, first and foremost, it's, 6 people getting on Skype to play a role-playing game. I'm kind of recording it almost as an afterthought. It was actually not supposed to be recorded at the beginning. So thankfully everyone did agree to have their recordings put online for all of us to enjoy and listen to, and for me to go through and try to clean up. Let's see here. We also have some comments on our website. First up from Lee Langton, who writes about Episode 5, Horror in Gaming. Great getting caught up on the show. Love it. I just cannot believe you didn't mention one of the, in my humble opinion, best horror RPGs ever. Dread is amazing for setting up the tension and atmosphere with their use of the Jenga tower for resolution. It's just a fantastic game and able to suspense and horror in an unusual and amazing way. Yeah, I pissed off at myself, and I think Ross kind of feels the same way, that we completely spaced on Dread when recording that episode. Dread has come up many, many times in other podcasts, and I do believe on at least one recorder we mentioned that we accidentally snubbed it on this. It wasn't because of any ill malice or anything like that. It was just, at that point in time, Ross hadn't played it. At that point in time, I hadn't played it. I still haven't had a chance to actually hands-on play the game. I've got the game now. I just don't own a Jenga tower at this point in time. But yeah, it wasn't intentional. We love the game. It is an amazing mechanic. It is a just great idea and concept. And yeah, it's a shame we left it out of the episode. I apologize to both fans of the game and to the designers. It's a brilliant game. Definitely check it out if you like any sort of horror RPGs, or if you like just the idea of building a lot of tension in your games. We also have a comment from regular Facebook commenter, the Grumpy Celt, on our Forgotten Realms episode. Fun episode, but I still hate 4th edition Forgotten Realms. Short, sweet, and to the point. I'm actually kind of meh about the whole thing. They did some things well and some things not so well. It suffered a little from trying to be the marquee setting, so they had to shoehorn the Dragonborn and the Warforged and the Changelings and all that into the setting somehow. And I thought they did a good job of shaking things up. As much as I love Forgotten Realms, I'm not that beholden to its canon. Like I said on that episode, I've only read the first 7 or 8 Dritz novels, and I think I read 1 or 2 other books set in Forgotten Realms, but that was when I was a teenager, and that was 20 years ago, and God knows how many gallons of bourbon since then. So I don't really remember that much about it. So I'm not attached to the setting as someone else maybe, or as I am to something like, Shadowrun. So that may color my opinion a little bit. We also got a lot of comments on the website about the Gamers Tavern game table. So, yeah, I'm really glad people are really liking it. The biggest question we get asked is, why did we go with 4th edition rather than the current 5th edition of Shadowrun? The 5th edition of Shadowrun came out sometime it was last summer, I believe, because I was at a con. It was last July because I was at RTX. I remember now, because that's when my review went up on Antical News. So, yeah, I like 5th edition. Don't get me wrong. But there are a lot of factors that went into making this decision. First and foremost is that in Shadowrun, and a lot of longtime fans will know what I'm talking about, the core book isn't the game. The core book, you can technically play out of it, but there's so much more to the Shadowrun world, especially in the game rules, that you're missing a lot if you just play out of the core rulebook, because every single edition from 1st all the way into 5th, because there's one coming out very soon, I think it's called Run and Gun, but they have advanced rules for, and these are the ones that are critical: advanced rules for magic, advanced rules for the Matrix, a book with a shitload of guns, a book with a shitload of extra cyberware and bioware, and the book with the alternate character creation rules. If we'd gone with 5th edition, we'd have to house rule fucking everything almost. Because, first and foremost, there's no pixie race for PCs in 5th edition yet. So, there's no Wraith. And because that's kind of core to his concept, is being a pixie, and just being a Shadowrun fanboy in and of itself isn't nearly as fun as being a, 1.5 tall Shadowrun stereotype. As you'll see in some future episodes with some reactions from NPCs. Sorry, we have a major NPC cameo who reacts to Wraith, and it's kind of fucking hilarious. Anyway, on top of that, about probably a third of my set of Babysitter cyberware isn't in the 5th edition game at this point. The attention code processor, I don't think his bone lacing option's in there yet, the Kevlar bone lacing, and there's just a lot of stuff that's just not in the game yet. I don't even know what the hell Reaver is, but most of that stuff isn't in the rules for 5th edition yet. I think some of Malachi's cyberware isn't in there. Some of the character options Soul took aren't in there. So, yeah, we just couldn't do the characters we wanted to do in 5th edition yet. The other reason is that most of us, aside from Kyle came in 5th edition, but all the rest of us know 4th edition pretty well. I've played in one campaign. I've run like 2 or 3 others in 4th edition. I've read almost all the books. Ross has played it very frequently. Brandon's played it very frequently. Cat Nine's played it frequently. Jeff Preston is a friggin' artist in 4th edition books, so he knows that pretty well. Kyle's pretty much the only one who doesn't have a lot of it, but he's picking up really quickly. So it's the edition that all of us were most comfortable with. And like I said, we were wanting to play Shadowrun first and foremost, and the recording thing came as kind of an afterthought. Another reason why, it's not a big reason, but it does factor in, Gamers Tavern Game Table is currently sponsored by Hero Lab, the amazing award-winning character management software from Lone Wolf Development. The software is amazing. It is one of the best character generators I have ever worked with in my life. But they don't have 5th edition Shadowrun yet. Hopefully, it's supposed to come up within the next month or two, but it's just they don't have it yet. So for the moment, we're playing the Shadowrun game set in Seattle in 2072 with 4th edition rules. As the timeline advances, when we get up to Great Overwatch Division and all the events and Stormfront and all that happen, or if the campaign ends and we start a new one and, you know, the source books availability and all that, we'll consider switching it, or we may go with a completely different game altogether for Game Table. That's all up in the air right now. Right now, we're sticking with Shadowrun 4th edition for at least the next several months. So that's why. For the record, definitely check out Shadowrun 5th edition. Catalyst Game Labs did an amazing job on it. That's about it for now. The Gamers Tavern is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license. The song Undead Blues by Unknown Henson is copyright 2006, used with permission. The song Insane by B. Shake is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Share-alike 3.0 international license. Until next time, gamers, the tavern is closed. 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 Closed.